Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Putri Sari. My ID number is 2011010600117. Right now, I will explain about the problem of translating text. First is problem of equivalence. The translation of idioms takes us a stage further in considering the question of meaning and translation for idioms like puns or culture bound. In the process of interlingual translation, one idiom substitute for another. Substitution is made not on the basis of the linguistic elements in the phrase corresponding or similar image contained in the phrase, but on the function of the idiom. Gogut's remarks about the problem of translating metaphor are interesting when applied also to the problem of tackling idioms. Since a metaphor in the source language is by definition a new piece of performance, a semantic novelty, it can clearly have no existing equivalence. Popovy distinguishes four types of translation equivalence. First is language equivalence. So there is homogeneity on the linguistic level. And the second is paradigmatic equivalence. So there is equivalence of the elements of a paradigmatic expressive axis. And then the third is stylistic translational equivalence. There is functional equivalence of elements in both original and translation, aiming of an expressive identity with an invariant of identical meaning. And fourth and the last is textual syntagmatic equivalence. There is equivalence of the syntagmatic structuring of a text. Translation involves more than replacement of lexical and grammatical items between language. Once the translator moves away from close linguistic equivalence, the problems of determining the exact nature of the level of equivalence aimed for begin to emerge. Eugene Nida distinguishes two types of equivalence. The first is formal equivalences, focus attention on the message itself in both form and content. And the second is dynamic equivalence, based on the principle of equivalence effect. It's an established fact in translation studies that if a dozen translators tackle the same poem, they will produce a dozen different versions, which called invariant core of the original poem. The invariant can be defined as that which exists in common between all existing translation of a single word. In trying to solve the problem of translation equivalence, Neighbor postulates that from the point of view of a theory of text, translation equivalence must be considered a semiotic category comprising a synthetic, semantic, and pragmatic component, following Peirce's categories where semantic equivalence takes priority over synthetic equivalence and pragmatic equivalence condition and modifies both the other elements. Equivalence in translation then shouldn't be approached as a search for sameness, since sameness can't even exist between two target language versions of the same text, let alone between the source language and target language version. And then B, common mistakes in translation. First is the translator leaves out some of the text that appeared in the source document that doesn't require translation. For example, phone number. And then the second is the translator misinterprets the meaning of the text and the final translation gives the wrong message. And the third is the translator incorrectly identify a brief abbreviations or misinterprets specific terminology. And then the fourth is the translator includes text or examples that are culturally inappropriate for the international audiences. And then the fifth, the translator is inconsistent in using or defining keywords or phrases throughout the documents or across different documents that are part of the same body of work. And the sixth is the client accepts changes to the translator to the translation offered by unqualified ad hoc reviewers. Okay, so that's all the explanation about the problem in translating text for me. Thank you for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.